All right. Hey, Sarah. I just read your aims on psychopathy and face emotion recognition and the desire to improve it with perceptual learning. Um, I think this is a good idea. This is a good, what I would call a fertile area where there's truth to be discovered here, and I don't think too many people have looked in this area, so this is a good area to look in. So I've written all over your thing here. You can come in sometime if you want and make a copy of this. I'd like to keep it so that I can review it also when you pass in your final. But if you want to look at all my specific comments, you can grab that. But I'll pretty much go through most of them verbally right now in this video. I guess take home message. Let's see. There's some. I mean, you're in a pretty good spot. You did very well with this. I can tell you worked hard on this, and they're just, I guess, style things or strengthening things for the most part. The one thing that's probably the biggest thing you still need to do is come up with a more satisfying rationale for why you want to do ERP. Yeah, I currently kind of say, well, it'll help us understand at the neurobiological level. That's okay. I mean, that's sort of a something an undergraduate would say, which you are. But I want you to go to the graduate student level here, and not just say we want to understand it neurobiologically, but you're talking about ERPs, which is a particular type of understanding. I mean, there's many, as you know, many ways to understand something neurobiologically at the level of an individual cell, within a cell, brain activity and fMRI, whatever. There's a million different ways, right? And you're talking about one of them. So you can't just say, well, it's helping us understand neurobiologically. I want you to be a little more specific with that. So think about that. Think about if you can come up with a particular thing that ERP is going to help us with. By the way, since you're not actually having to do this study, you could propose a different form of neuroimaging if you think that would be helpful for you to, if you could make a better argument for that. So if you think it would be more neurobiologically interesting to look at fMRI, for example, and see the changes in FFA as a result potentially of perceptual learning, that would possibly be good. So, okay, so let me go through here my point by point. I think the first section here, you have a lot on of general stuff on psychopathy, which you could probably abbreviate. I would say maybe if there's other things that aren't clear yet. For example, what I was just talking about, why do you want to do ERP, or what do you want to do if you want to do something instead of that, you need to take up some space to do that, and you're pretty much at your space here. So I'd say if you cut that first section here in half, I wrote abbreviate. You'd be fine. That'd be plenty to say about psychopathy in general. All right. You end that section very well. You say, therefore, it is extremely important to find ways in which psychopathy can be helped so that their quality of life improves for the better. I think you can just say quality of life improves. You can't improve for the worse, right? Just to be succinct, save 3 words there. But also you could mention, this would add a little bit, but and for those around them, because people with psychopathy, it seems like, don't always mind having psychopathy. They like taking advantage of other people, and they probably don't mind the fact that they don't feel guilt. I mean, maybe every now and then they introspect, but for the most part they don't. So it's really a big factor here is for the people around them not to be taken advantage of and stuff. If we could heal the evil, essentially, of these people, that would be helpful for a lot of people, not just for them. That's part of the impact. So the next part actually could be expanded. So you say, numerous studies have shown that there's a deficit in emotion recognition, particularly with fearful, sad, or happy faces. Yeah, if you have any more details on that, like what types of studies showed that deficit, what kind of a deficit was it? Do you think it was a generalized deficit, or are you really convinced like they just didn't do good on the task because they were like, fuck this, I'm a psychopath, I don't care, I'm just glad they're paying me and then I'm gonna be out of here, or was it a specific deficit you're convinced, it's really about it can't recognize emotions well. It's not just that they didn't care about the task or they didn't pay attention to the task. So look carefully at those studies and see what you think and articulate that a little more. One other thing I wrote here is you can make your first sentence more specific and forceful. The purpose of the proposed study, you said, is to learn more about emotion recognition as it relates to individual psychopathy. See if you can be a little more specific and a little more forceful there. You're basically saying, well, we want to learn more about these two things, but try to be a little more powerful with it. The other thing I said is try to throw Cleckley a bone. Almost every paper I've ever read on psychopathy mentions this guy Cleckley, who was like the first real researcher on psychopathy. I think he created a questionnaire for it, the psychopathy scale or something like that. So if you Google him, you'll probably find his scale. It's like 30 items, or I forget how many items it is. It might not be 30. But it's glibness and callousness and all these different parts of psychopathy, some of which you seem to be familiar with. He's the one sort of invented that. So usually you would cite Cleckley to show that you're kind of aware that he is where a lot of this research on psychopathy began. Another part to expand could be to say a little more about perceptual learning and what that is. Usually when people talk about that, they mention the fact that there's been studies that have shown that the learning in perceptual learning appears to take place fairly early within the visual system. So for example, if your perceptual learning is about motion, it appears that motion sensitive brain areas are why you're improving during perceptual learning of motion. It's not just that you're like getting better at taking tests in general or something, or you're gaming the test, or you're paying attention better. It's that your motion sensitive brain areas are tuning their neurons differently. And there's been studies, I think in monkeys and stuff, that have more or less given evidence for that, as well as some in humans. Like that, I think I told you about the acuity, hyperacuity, it's called. You can do perceptual learning and get better at the Vernier acuity, saying whether, which line is to the right or to the left of the other. Okay. So you can mention, see if you can make a compelling case for how awesome perceptual learning is, and what it is, and where you think it occurs in the brain, if you want. I don't know, you had mentioned earlier about particular emotions, fearful, sad, and happy. Are those the emotions you anticipate that there's going to be a deficit on in your patients? I presume it is. Another thing to change just the wording, this is a small thing, but individuals with psychopathy will show blah, blah, blah. Usually, I think you would say individuals who are high on psychopathy. So psychopathy is a trait. It's not a diagnosis. In fact, your second sentence seems to be the opposite of my understanding. So you say psychopathy is considered to be on the far end of the spectrum of ASPD. Rather, I think it's the other way around. I think ASPD is a diagnosis in the DSM, which you can meet criteria or not. It's a binary thing. You either have ASPD or you don't. And people who do have ASPD tend to be very high on the trait of psychopathy. So psychopathy is a personality trait. ASPD is a personality disorder diagnosis. So you would say people who have high levels of psychopathy versus people who have ASPD. Okay. And, your last sentence there in that first aim, improving the emotional recognition of psychopathic individuals is important because it will help bring them closer to normal perceptual thresholds. Okay, and why is that important? So let's say you're right. Let's say you can improve the ability to recognize faces on your test in antisocial personality, or in people who have high levels of psychopathy. Why do you think that's going to help anyone, including them or the people around them? you got to make some sort of argument there. The average reader is going to be, for a grant, they're going to be looking at other potential impactful grants, and they'll be like, okay, she improved their ability to do this emotion recognition test. Why would I care? So make up some argument why that's going to impact the world or the life of these people. Similarly, for your next aim, I wrote down why is it important that your N170 and P200 responses are going to, they're not going to be blunted anymore. They're going to be at a normal level. Why is that important? All right. So I think we can stop there. So again, I gave you a bunch of feedback. That's the case for every student in the class. You're actually the first one I'm doing here. So you're doing very well, but I still have a bunch of feedback to give. That's just the way it is. Sort of treating you as a graduate student. So yeah, feel free to get in touch with questions, but you're on a good track.